3rd, I'm going to go ahead and call the Marathon County Infrastructure Committee meeting to order. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We will go ahead and move on to public comment. Actually, I just want to check, do we have anybody that's online? Okay. Do we have anybody here that wishes to make public comment? All right, if you could come forward and get you a microphone. Just name and address.
Sure. My name is Carol Wesley. I'm from the Achieve Center at 520 North 28th Avenue. I'm here because in September of 2021, this body had stated that in March at this meeting, a decision would be rendered related to the expansion of the 28th Avenue corridor. And this is really affecting Achieve Center because we have expansion plans. Unfortunately, the county has a right-of-way that extends into the area where we need to begin construction. So we are currently in a real bind because our contractor will not be able to begin construction because of its own demands until 2023, unless within the next month or so we can have a free right-of-way to be able to begin this construction. And so I am really desperately appealing to all of you to please make a decision and to relinquish the right-of-way that extends 80 feet into our property.
All right, thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Seeing no other public present, I'll assume that's the end of our public comment for today. Moving on to item 3, approval of minutes of the February 3, 2022 Infrastructure Committee meeting. What is your pleasure? Motion by Robinson, second by Christensen. Any further questions, comments on minutes? All those in favor of approving those minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed, say nay. Minutes for February 3, 2022 Infrastructure Committee meeting are approved. We're on to item 4, policy issues, discussion and potential committee determinations. 4A, review of department's policy and procedures for utility accommodations for possible revisions for county's desire for broadband expansion. Commissioner Griesbach, take it away.
Thank you. We met a few weeks back to discuss the broadband expansion here in Marathon County and how it affects our current policy that we have. In your packet, you'll see the utility accommodations policy in there. There is some updates to that because about a year ago, this committee approved a price increase to have 100% cost recovery. So we do need to update the policy procedure manual, which we plan on bringing to the new committee, whoever that may be, here in April. So our current policy, as approved a year ago, was we charge $175 for a permit. What we did when we created that price is that was an average. So sometimes we get utility permits, we review all the permits in the office. Sometimes we take a look at those permits and they're boring across the road. Very simple, and some of those permits we come out ahead. The next permit may be a mile stretch down the road, so we average everything out and we said it's $175 for a permit fee, which we established. With the broadband expansion, we had discussed how we're going to handle that, seeing that's, what is it, 175 miles, Jerry, on county roads, or is it 300 miles? I think 175. Yeah, I believe it's 175 to 200 miles on county roads. Well, we cannot review that and have 100% cost recovery for $175. So we sat down a few weeks ago, I believe it was Randy, Jerry, John, myself, and Lance, and discussed possibilities of this. We did discuss it a while back also about doing it by the township. So what we came up with, you'll see it here on the agenda, and then later on there's be a resolution on this. What we're talking about doing is having the utility company for the broadband expansion only put in applications by the township. So every township that they touch, they'll need to put an application for that township. Realizing some townships, they may just clip a corner, and maybe there's only a mile in that township. Some townships, they may have 15 to 20 miles. So we'll have them give an application in for each township. We'll give them 1 hour inspection fee on that. Anything further than that, we will track their hours and take a look at being reimbursed through Marathon County for their extra work order compiled during the summer. And I believe John's got some way to possibly fund that. But we would track the hours, and this would encourage broadband expansion through Marathon County. So later on, again, we have a resolution, but we just put it on here for discussion at this point. You want to add anything, John, or?
Supervisor Robinson?
Later in the packet, you have a resolution, and the resolution says that the county, one of the concerns is the cost and the burden on the highway department staff, and we wanted to make sure that they were held harmless, and we proposed that language that Marathon County may reimburse the cost of inspection over the 1 hour per township through the use of either the American Rescue Plan Act or the Capital Improvement Project funds, if those funds are available and obtainable by the county. That's sort of setting us up as a broadband forward type county where we're encouraging it. We understand that there will be significant work in there, and it's permissive in the context of May, so it's not requiring us to do it, but it's looking for funding source. We currently have $114,000 plus in the capital plan. We will have some grant applications coming up, but I think that there should be sufficient funds in that capital fund going forward, again, looking to try to accelerate the process. So we looked at that as a potential funding source.
Supervisor Seiler?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I don't think their microphone's on.
There we are. Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering, I had a phone call from one of my local officials who was taking a look at this, and just wondering if there was any role or any anticipated impact. I mean, reading through this, it's the permit will be issued by the county. But again, their question was, is there a role or anything that would impact the towns in any way that they need to be aware of?
The permit that we'll issue would only be for the town, for the county roads. Most towns, years back, there is a utility accommodation policy out there for townships that they can adopt. I believe it's also on the Wisconsin Towns Association website. It mirrors the county accommodation policy. If a township does not have that, I strongly encourage them to adopt the utility accommodation policy. So the permit that we are looking at and approving are only for county trunk highways.
Okay, follow-up?
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you for clarifying that. So given that, if we do support and this ultimately passes, would it be just helpful to our local partners, the towns, to receive a communication encouraging for those that don't? I mean, do you have any idea right now how many towns would have that on the books already? And if they don't, they should be strongly considering this?
The town utility accommodation policy was out probably around the year 2000, and that's when we had the big, strong push for towns to adopt it. So I do not have any numbers on how many towns adopted it at that point. You'd have to check your town records, I believe.
Okay, but again, just to be sure that as we're having this policy discussion, putting this in place, that at least the word goes out informing the towns, communication that we are doing this, and they should consider checking and updating their policies as well, just a courtesy.
I will check with the Towns Association if they have it on their website with a link.
Great,
And then I'll send it to all the clerks in throughout the county.
that would be good, thank you.
Anybody else on the committee have any further comment? Supervisor Dickinson?
So my question is, in looking at the resolution and just trying to understand how this would work, so it's $175 per hour, per township. And then after that, we will be tracking the charges and applying those charges to the utility provider, because in a resolution it says we shall do that. So it says more than 1 hour of highway department inspection time within a particular township, the highway department shall track and charge to the utility provider the actual costs over 1 hour. The next statement then says Marathon County may seek reimbursement of costs for inspection time over 1 hour per the ARPA or SIP. So are we using the ARPA and SIP first, and then we may or shall be going to the utility provider? I'm just not sure how that works. The language seems convoluted, or am I misinterpreting?
Go ahead, Supervisor Robinson.
Where's Michael when we need him? But the intent was that we would track the hours and we would bill it. If there's no funding, if the county doesn't have funding, we would then bill the utilities. But what you would basically do is create a charge account for internal tracking. And so you would have a project, let's say that you're in Cronewater and you had Bug Tussle and Frontier doing projects, each of them would be tracked separately. We want to make sure that the gym staff is held harmless. The proposal is that we would track those hours, look at the fund. If we don't have the funds, then we would go back to the utility. But we would look to the utility first. And if there's a way to clarify that and make that clearer, but I think the use of the word may gives us that ability to react within budget.
We'll go Administrator Leonard, and then we'll go Supervisor Johnson.
If, hearing your explanation, Supervisor Robinson, of the intent, my initial read is more in line with Supervisor Dickinson's read of that. So I think we would need to essentially flip kind of the presumption of how the default of how that works. But if there's a desire to do that, we can sit down pretty quickly and make that change. So I just want to make sure I understand what the intent was. The intent was to track the costs incurred by the county and seek reimbursement essentially through the American Rescue Plan project funds or CIP funds. And if that funding is not available, then to seek reimbursement from the utility?
Go Supervisor Johnson, and then back.
Green. There it is, okay. I agree, and I think it's with your reading of it, with Supervisor Dickinson's reading of it, I think it's easy to remedy by leaving the shall language in there, but ending the sentence with, if the cost is not reimbursed through ARPA or the capital improvement plan, period. And that would satisfy it. Because if the first option is to take the funds from ARPA or the capital improvement plan, that's the first option. But it states that we shall, if it's not reimbursed through those funds. And I think that would clarify it. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson.
I was going to offer a change in dealing with that question. The highway department shall, and delete the language "and charge the utility provider." You just delete that and then put shall track the actual costs associated with the inspection time over 1 hour, and then I would create a final paragraph, another sentence, in the event that the county does not reimburse the department, those costs shall be charged to the utility.
Accomplish the same thing.
Right.
But as usual, you're just more wordy.
If I may, my only concern with doing that is, if this policy has life beyond the effective date of the American Rescue Plan, you don't provide for the opportunity to seek reimbursement from the utility. So if I understand your intent to be that we track and make an initial attempt to reimburse ourselves for our actual costs from the American Rescue Plan Act or any already existing capital improvement fund designated by the county, and in the event neither of those two are available, we charge the utility, we can put that language in there. But my only concern with the avenue you referenced, Supervisor Robinson, is that if there is a permit application post-American Rescue Plan, we essentially are eating those costs.
So I think we've got a couple different options at this point. We could take a motion with revised language in there. We could also request that staff just brings this back at a future meeting, because I don't think there is a time crunch on this. If we brought it back next meeting.
They're ready to go permits now.
All right, so there maybe is a time crunch on this.
It would be good to get that.
All right. I think with just what's been discussed of the intent, I think we're all on the same page. It's just a matter of wordsmithing that out. So Supervisor Johnson.
Yeah, I think in order to accomplish that, we take the sentence that reads, "This $175 permit fee shall be paid by the utility provider," and that ends with public right-of-way of a county trunk highway. Change the period to a comma, unless funds have been secured from the American Rescue Plan Act or the Capital Improvement Fund. Period. Done.
Would you like to put that in the form of a motion?
And I move we do so.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Could
Second
you
by Christensen.
restate the motion?
Okay, we take the sentence that ends in require utility accommodation with the public right of a county trunk highway, change the period to a comma, and then go forward with unless funds for reimbursement have been secured from the American Rescue Plan Act or the Capital Improvement Fund. And I think I have that correct. Period. I make that motion because I think it's important we keep that shall language in there. We don't want it squishy. I mean, we want to make sure we're getting reimbursed one way or the other.
Supervisor Robinson?
Jeff, I don't disagree with the intent, but I think, is the effect of yours waiving the $175 fee or anything above the $175?
No, that sentence, John, that sentence says, this permit fee shall be paid by the utility, shall be paid. You end the sentence with, unless the funds are secured through the American Rescue Plan Act or the Capital Improvement Fund. I mean, it's pretty clear, I think, and we can have our lawyerly county administrator weigh in on that. But I think that accomplishes what we want to do.
I think the point, trying to infer what Supervisor Robinson is getting at is, I think the issue we are having is not the $175 fee, it's the inspection fees above the $175. So I think it's later in the paragraph we'd make the changes that you referenced. That it's
You're waiving the fee.
the department shall track and charge to the utility provider the actual costs associated with all inspection time over 1 hour in the event reimbursement from the American Rescue Plan Act or a designated capital improvement fund is not available. Does that make sense?
That does. So I think we'd have to go towards the end, the last sentence, where it says Marathon County may seek reimbursement costs, and instead make that if Marathon County receives reimbursement from the American Rescue Plan Act or the Capital Improvement Project funds, the fee to the utility shall be waived. Something along that line, because that's, to John's point, would include all of the time beyond the 1 hour. So if someone wants to wordsmith that, who's smarter than me, that'd be great.
We're going to see if we can get some words up on the screen so everybody can see what we're looking at. Yeah. Supervisor Gums.
Would that take care of the whining when you run out of money and then another company comes along and says, hey, you paid the other guy's bill?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll take care of the whining, but it should be clear on what our policy is. Yeah. I see another hand up, Supervisor Dickinson.
Yeah, I do have difficulty that we're imposing this fee structure after we've made a decision to move forward with broadband. It's kind of like we didn't have a structure in place, then we do this thing with broadband, and now we're going to impose this fee structure because we didn't think about the potential of something like this. It seems a little bit, awkward, if I will, which kind of ties in a little bit to what Supervisor Gums is saying, that some people can look at that as kind of a special treatment for us or for a particular provider or utility, I should say. So just wanted to make that point. The question I would have is, do we have an idea what the total cost of the inspection time is going to be, so we can kind of have a gauge in our mind of what the ARPA fund or SIP fund or cost to utility provider is going to be? Thanks.
Do we have any ideas on that? Okay, we're going to go with Supervisor Christensen, and then we'll get you an answer.
Okay, I just have a question. You're going to charge for each township that they go through. Will the townships still be able to charge a permit fee also for this?
On their town roads, they
On our
would be
town roads,
able
yeah.
to, yes. So it's really two separate avenues. On the county trunk highways, this is in fact, once you go on the town roads, then it's whatever your town policy would be. You have a number?
I would expect we're probably going to spend about 8 hours a week, I would think, on this on average. Figuring that out for 4 months, you're talking anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000.
And I mean, if we can, if you can expand on what the existing policy is for, because there is an existing utility policy
We
in
do
place
have the
currently.
existing utility accommodation policy, like I spoke earlier, where we go out and do the inspection. Usually it's a quarter mile to a mile long. So, this is kind of a unique situation. But what we expect, we talked about this in our office, is when we do the inspection, it's not going to be somebody just set for it and say, all right, today I'm going to go do utility inspections. Between our supervisors, we all have the capability of doing inspection. Our supervisors are spread out on projects throughout the county. So Chris Pagoon's going to run point on this. He's in charge of our permit process. So he may say, I received a notice in that they completed a section of road. And Kevin's going to be going out that side of the county today to do some survey work. So Kevin, when you go out there, please stop by and check that out. So we really don't have a set, all right, I'm going to go out today and check from here to here because it's the notice is done. We do it as a group. So it's kind of an average. We figure that he's going to have about, Chris is running point on, have about that much time in it.
So we'll give it a couple more seconds here, but we should have language coming up on the screen there. Give everybody a few seconds to read that over. I thank our best and brightest for putting that together quickly. Does anybody on the committee have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Just for clarification so we put this together correct, that paragraph would replace the bottom part of both under the whereas and the resolve, correct?
Okay.
We'll go Supervisor Johnson and Supervisor Robinson.
Okay, if reading that, it doesn't include the 1 hour. Now we've just includes everything over an hour. And so if you just take out may seek reimbursement costs for the total cost rather than cost for inspection time over 1 hour, something to that effect. Because if you're just limited to costs over 1 hour, you're saying we're charging you the $175 no matter what. If that's the intent, that's fine. Is that the intent? Excellent, perfect. Then it's right on the mark.
Supervisor Robinson.
Are we taking this up out of order?
Taking up in order what aspect?
The resolution's agendized later in the agenda.
Oh, I apologize.
So should we, because we've been discussing it, take it up now? And if we do, for purposes of putting it on the table, I would move adoption of the resolution. And then you can amend it.
Okay. Yeah, just going through this, yes. So we have a motion from Robinson. We're in discussion on item 5B at this point, which is resolution to authorize broadband permit fee structure. So with that in mind, we have a motion from Supervisor Robinson to adopt the policy as amended, shown on the screen.
No, we can't do it as amended, just to adopt it.
Yeah.
As in the packet.
Yep. All right, thank you. And we have a second by Supervisor Johnson. Yep. With that in mind, Supervisor Johnson?
I move that we amend to include the language which has been so graciously displayed on the screen for us, changing the last sentence to read, the Highway Department shall track and charge the utility provider the actual costs associated with all inspection time over 1 hour unless reimbursement from said inspection costs are available through the American Rescue Plan Act or the Capital Improvement Project funds.
And a second by Dickinson. Is everybody clear on the amendment? All those in favor with the amended language signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And that brings us back to the main motion. Any questions, comments at this point? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, say nay. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for that. We will return to item 4B, Marathon County Highways 2050 Transportation Plan. Go ahead.
I will kick off the conversation. Darrell is also here from North Central Planning Region, who put the plan together to study. We sent this out, and I know it's a very long and lengthy policy that we're looking at, and there'll probably be a lot of discussion on it. One thing that I had talked to the Administrator Leonard about is I got a funny feeling this is going to be like I said, a few-month conversation. With the elections coming up, we don't know what this committee is going to look like and when we get to the meat and potatoes of this. So Kevin has a few highlights for you. But the questions, I guess, is what will be the next steps that we do have this report put together? And is there any additional information you believe would be helpful for the committee moving forward with this? Because this will probably be one of their major tasks once we get together here in May. So with that, I don't know if Kevin just wants to hit a few of the highlights or if anybody has any questions to start with.
I'll fill the awkward silence. I just had a few comments tonight. Some of them are just some minor clerical things that I can run through with North Central Region, and then did look at a couple comments in there with like looking at ADTs. Some of the ADTs that are in there, they come off of the state's Whistler database, it's called. We don't have a traffic counting program for the county. We make use of the state's data, and some of those data points I think are low. I know I came across one up by Amco Park where it was under 250, and then I was looking back at some plans from 2014, and it's about 500. So it's kind of a point, if we're making decision trees and processes based off those ADTs, I think it'll be important that we might want to implement some additional traffic counting in a few of those projects that we identify where those old database numbers that have just kind of morphed through the system aren't as current as they should be. A lot of those low volume ones, the state does not count. So we may want to include that. And the only other couple topics that were more conversational was with like X, double X, and Highway O and some of those expansion projects in there. I think it might be beneficial if we're going to take a deeper look at those, of maybe getting a map of those in here. I think those visuals help people look to see where those are and would help kind of facilitate some of those discussions. So that might be something we want to work with. And then I had a couple comments or thoughts about our PACER ratings. We have this study has a map in there that has kind of prioritized routes, and our PACER rating, our goal right now with our plans is to maintain that goal of 7. That 7 goal doesn't really, it's for everything altogether. And one of the topics of conversation, if we were looking at gap analysis and whether we're going to change up what our goals on it for funding and approach to it, is maybe we need to separate out that goal of 7, maintain that for, I think we had 1 through 20 was the ranking, where 20 is like the most important roads based off of what it's servicing. One thought that the committee might want to look at is we look at, okay, the 10 and under is maybe 6 as a goal, or vice versa, the 10 through 20s, those high priorities, maybe we should try to push those up a little bit higher. So that was just kind of one of the thoughts I had reading through here. If we were going to look to make a change, if we needed to adjust something, that instead of looking at that whole system and figuring a 250 car a day road is just as important as a 15,000 car a day road, that might be a spot to kind of look at a change in our decision process through paving.
I think you hit on a really good point there, and I'll just make some comments and then I'll hand it over to Daryl. I don't know if Daryl has anything to add on, but just looking at the document specific to chapters 6 and 7, I found a good value just looking at the recommendations, and then specifically in the next steps, maybe it's not 7, but next steps moving forward. And there's some really good policy discussions in there, you know, in terms of what the county can do, talking about the size of our system, quality of the system, and how to fund the system. Those are probably the big questions that keep Jim up at night, I assume, right? So, I mean, we have to take a look, and I think it's a really good point that not all county highway roads are created equal. 15,000 car road is much different than a 200. And looking at that, and they're all important for the people that they serve, but we need to make some decisions based on volume and value. So I think those are some really good points, and look forward to the discussion on that and how we can iron this out. Go back to Daryl from North Central Regional Planning. Do you have anything further if you want to grab a?
Oh, Mike, I don't have a lot to say at this point, but
So, yeah, I don't want to, I guess extend the conversation out too much. I think what Jim and Kevin and everybody said is very good, right on the point there. I know there are issues with the traffic counts, and we've been looking at that, and I think, they're representative, relative in some cases, but we did look at a lot of the traffic counts and made some adjustments, but we do know that that's an issue, so we will, I get to talk to Kevin a little bit more about addressing that situation. We came up with this system of sort of prioritizing the highway segments, but it never really occurred to me to have sort of a tiered system, and we did talk about that, the difference in the types of county highways that or the level of use of the county highways, but it never occurred to me to sort of break them out, and so you have a lower use road versus a higher use road. So I think that's although the system that we came up with does take that into account actually in the ranking of it. So, but yeah, that's a really good idea that Kevin had, that we will explore that further with Kevin and bring something forward on that. That's all I have, unless there's other questions.
Daryl, have you done, or has North Central done any other similar type projects or reports to this for other counties in your region?
Not to this extent yet, but we've been in a lot of counties having, well, actually, most of the counties that I work with are in worse shape than you guys are. And so everybody is struggling with a lot of these same questions. And so we have been talking to a number of counties, but we haven't actually, we do a lot of different sort of highway analysis and capital improvements programming for, well, mostly for lower municipalities, but some counties. But no, so nothing to this detail yet, but like I said, we are in talks with other counties in looking at some of these kinds of things.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you. In regards to that, when you have priorities low, medium, and high, what tends to happen is you always address the high priority. So low priority roads that are out there in the sticks, right, in certain parts of the county, always remain low. So I would like to see something in the plan that maybe a timeline, a time measure, that after a year, a low gets a higher priority. Maybe a low gets to a medium, or over 2 years or something like that. I mean, I know we're addressing the roads as they, before they diminish, right, before they get worse. But just in my experience, when you have these ratings, low, medium, high, you always tend to focus on the high, and the lows you always kind of push off. Well, when we get extra money, we'll do that. And then, then you're just kind of pushing away some areas of the county that still need to be addressed. The second thought I would have in the plan is, back when the wheel tax was imposed for a temporary and then a permanent, and a lot of controversy about that, I would like to see something in the plan that addresses kind of the metrics at that time that were used, like how many bridges and how many roads needed to be addressed, and try to bring that kind of statistical analysis. What did we address with the wheel tax money when that was imposed? How many roads did we fix? How many bridges did we fix? So that you have some sort of analysis in this plan. Otherwise it's just, well, we did a thing and we fixed some roads and we imposed a tax and we never really told anybody about it. And here we have an ability with this plan to do that, to look at what's going to be for the future, especially if the wheel tax remains. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to comment on your first point, I think with that hybrid pacer rating goal system, that might be a way of doing it where when we have those roads and they're getting lower volumes, but it may take a little bit more time and they may sit at the bottom of that for an extra year or two. But at least we know at that point we need to bring them up to a 10 and keep that pacer rating average in place. So I think you make some good points. Thank you. Anybody else? We'll go Supervisor Gums and then Supervisor Robinson.
Okay, are we gonna, in the future, rebuild roads to all-season roads capabilities? Because we don't enforce the weight limit thing very good at all. We have limited people in the sheriff's department that can come out. So if we'd rebuild them to all-season road conditions, you wouldn't have to do that. Because if you don't have people enforcing 80,000 or 86,000, they get beat to heck right away.
Supervisor Robinson?
I want to go back to Supervisor Dickinson's request relative to the wheel tax. I think that might be a worthwhile separate study. And I think one of the concerns that I have going forward is where we're going to be in light of the growing number of electric vehicles and the whole issue of funding. So if we can look at historic funding patterns and future funding patterns, I think that's something different. But again, the premise for this report was work that was done in Washington County, where they developed a 2050 plan. And it sprung out of a concern because invariably Marathon County, whenever they needed a budget cut, at the end of the budget process, tended to go into and cut out capital projects in the highway department. And we have a general transportation aid formula that's driven by a 6-year average. And when you do that, you penalize yourself when you make those cuts for a 6-year period of time. And what we were trying to do is get a more dependable budgeting cycle that could allow us to look at when certain projects were in that 6-year formula and when certain ones were out, and try to maximize the reimbursement through general transportation aid. And this is the start of that. I think one of the important questions is that Supervisor Gums made, which is a policy question, is what standards should we build our roads to? Because in Washington County, all of their roads are all-season, but they have a lot less roads. They have a lot less miles and, a significantly reduced number. And they've done jurisdictional transfers and other things with, both accepting and transferring responsibility for roads. So there are a number of other policy issues that go with this plan that I think we need to address. But the issue of funding is one that we need to look at both historically, how it's impacted us, but more as importantly, if general transportation aid's tanked because there's no dollars going in through the gas tax, we're going to be hurting.
Supervisor Johnson?
As an owner of 3 Priuses, I'm telling you, I'm paying an extra $225 a year already, John. So there is already a recapture for those of us who are using less petrol. So I think that door's already been opened. If the fleet of vehicles across the state move towards more of an electric base than fossil fuels, I think you're just going to see that go up. But the process is already in place to capture funding. Believe me, I know. Thank you.
Anything further on the plan at this time? It'll be Supervisor Seiler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the recommendations, and I know this would be a ways out, but is to consider a highway functional jurisdictional study. And looking at that, it says to consider this transfer of segments to reduce overall mileage being maintained. So I'm just wondering currently, what our history has been of that, if there is a policy, how often that's happened. Because looking at that, it could easily be viewed as just shifting the burden to another entity, and probably to someone who's in a less position, and which would further increase the or decrease the ability of maintaining the road. So I would just like a little more information on what our history has been with that, how that takes place, and if there would be a study to be sure that anyone that would be impacted by that would have a seat at the table or a representative. Thank you.
Commissioner Griesbach, can you comment a little bit just on historical jurisdictional transfers and how often that's taken place?
Very limited historical transfers. Normally, what the transfers have been has been more in the municipalities. Ones that jumped to the top of my head is County Chunk Highway V through the village of Spencer, County Chunk Highway N through Marathon City. So normally what the procedure is, we'll rebuild that road to current standards, and at that point then we turn it over to the municipalities. But there has been a few. We had one down in McMillan where we turned over a rural section of road, about 2.52 miles of County Chunk Highway T. And we turned that over to the township, and about 2 years later, the committee accepted it back on to the county system because the township could not maintain it. And that road was not rebuilt at that time, but the county ended up taking that road back over. That is the only rural section that I can think of off the top of my head. County Chunk Highway JJ through Weston Schofield area out there, that was turned over when 29 was built. That was turned over to the locals, but that was a transfer from the state to the locals, not from county to local. A portion of it. A portion of it was county and a portion of it was state.
Does anybody have anything further at this time? Otherwise, this will be coming back for future discussions at this committee and at future infrastructure committees. All right, seeing nobody's, oh, sorry, Kevin.
I'll throw one last topic out there that the other thing to look at on this is, Daryl, is the gap analysis in the back where basically says if we keep maintaining and doing what we're doing, this is the funding that's going to be required. I'll throw that out as an option is keep a goal of 7 and keep doing what we've been doing with replacing pavements and keeping them upgraded. If you like the system we have, then the big question is, how are we going to keep funding it? Because the cost of infrastructure goes up. Some years it's 3% with the norm, and this year our asphalt's up about 15%. So that is an option to go. We like our system. This is working well. We're going to keep these goals. Now we're just going to fund it. So I want to throw that out there because we talk about a lot of change, and maybe it's not broken.
A lot of good policy questions to be had for sure. All right, we're going to move on to item 4C, 2022 PSC Broadband Access Grant Partnerships, and we'll turn it over to the chair of the Broadband Task Force, Supervisor Robinson.
Let me just start out by saying I wish I had a clear message to deliver today, but we're struggling. So we sent out invitations to all of the internet service providers known in Marathon County to submit proposals for us to consider. Those were due February 14th. We received responses from LTD, Bug Tussle, Frontier, Charter, and Serenity. In the packet is a spreadsheet that summarizes some of that information. After the 14th, the Broadband Task Force met on the 21st and felt as if we needed additional information. We sat down and sent out requests for additional information to the parties, obtained some. We're still looking for additional clarification. The concerns that we have are there are apparent overlaps in proposed service with existing service and proposed overlaps with within the grant applications themselves. And are based on a review of what PSC has done in the past is that if there's overlaps, PSC determines that there may not be a need for state funding and the projects get disqualified or not funded. And there are always more applications than there is interest. So we've been trying to sit down with the parties and see if we can modify scopes of that service to reflect where there are needs and where there are overlaps to reduce those. I don't think it's in our interest to support projects that overlap. And some of those overlaps are in Cronin-Water. There are overlaps with Charter, and we thought Frontier, but Frontier sent us some maps that we're trying to verify if they're accurate. They're proposing to serve 1,040 homes in Cronin-Water, but yet their maps don't show any, so we're looking for clarification. We'll have a meeting this afternoon, and then Bug Tussle is in that area. There's another area in Reed and Bevent where Serenity is proposing, and Frontier is also proposing. And again, our concern is that if there are multiple proposals for the same area, PSC will say, there's interest, no need. Last time we had $38 million of requests in from Marathon County, and we funded one project with Serenity, and it had under $1 million. So we weren't all that successful. So the task force is trying to reconcile those, and we've got a deadline of March 17th for the grant submittal in generating letters of support. And we looked at how we might approach this. And one approach would be to look at the cost per unit served in there, and we found that the lowest cost request for county share was from Serenity at $190 per unit. In Frontier was at $235. The Broadband Task Force, on the motion of Supervisor Guild, chose a $235 per unit. So if there are 100 units served, you get 100 times 235 as the county's match. And in addition, we would look at the concept, we'd look at the concept of making that a forgivable loan, and it would be paid upon the actually installation of the system, so it would not be fronted. But typically the county pays after the fact once the work is done anyway, so I don't know that materially changes it. But then we looked at the concept of having a loan, making a loan available for anything above that. We had a request, for instance, from Charter at $1.6 million from the county, and we don't have that in our budget. And the thought is if we could turn that into a low, no-interest loan using ARPA funds, that would give us the broadband potential and have a repayment schedule associated with it. So we're still in the development stage of that, but the proposal was, again, to look at a per unit served basis as sort of incentivizing it, and then looking at loans in lieu of a significant contribution on the part of the county going forward. We have heard from Frontier. Frontier is not interested in a loan going forward. Part of that probably deals with their reorganization in their financial problems. They are looking for a level of participation. Charter prefers not to have, based on information this morning, not to have a loan as part of this grant application, but to pursue the grant. And I'm not sure how we would deal with their $1.6 million request. LTD has come in. They came in with trying to serve the footprint of the Ardoff area, where they were selected to submit a long form for much of the western part of Marathon County, but including areas on the eastern side and a limited town of Wausau, Weston, and some other communities. We ask questions of, well, is this in lieu of Ardoff? My understanding is that there are concerns that have been raised relative to a number of providers under the Ardoff program, including duplication of services, and the FCC is slowly processing those. But we've asked them for updated maps. PSC has updated the maps recently in terms of under and unserved areas, and much of that Ardoff area is now, quote, served based on the new map. We don't know why it's considered served, because we continue to see deficiencies in service in that area. But they are not submitting maps to us, so they've effectively taken them out of consideration by the county for a partner at this time. That doesn't mean we won't do it going forward. So we are looking at how we can reduce the footprint, reduce the overlap, looking at the concept of funding at $235 per unit, and offering the availability of loans for the balance to try to look at it. That will require a two-thirds vote of the county board at some future date. Because the applications are submitted, then PSC takes a period of time to review them. We would look to other funding sources. I think what we learned from this process is that we continue to be at the mercy of internet service providers deciding what area they're going to serve. Part of that's driven by the PSC and FCC maps. I think going forward, given what we're doing with the Area Economic Development Associations and North Central Region, Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission with GeoPartners, we'll have a much better database of what areas are actually underserved in terms of speeds. And I think what we need to do going forward is specifically target the town of Harrison, the town of Gunther, the town of Castle, the town of Cleveland, and saying that these are the areas we would like to see served that are underserved based upon the data that we're receiving. Please submit a specific proposal to those areas that are underserved and move forward. But that's not what we did this time, and I think, I wish we had, but I think that's growing clear, it's becoming more clear that we need to specifically target those areas going forward. So we're asking the committee today to endorse the concept of funding up to $235 per unit served, and the concept of making loans available through the ARPA plan subject to county board approval for those funding sources. And Supervisor Seiler has been at those meetings, and Chair Gibbs has been participating, and Noor Ali Hassan has been doing a lot of the work, doing the outreach to the internet service providers, and we have very prompt response from the more local firms in terms of LTD and, Serenity and Bug Tussle, and a little slower response from the larger national firms.
Questions, comments from the committee? Supervisor Johnson.
Yeah, I just wonder, it must be extremely difficult, and maybe you could expand on that just a little bit, to voluntarily get them to change their proposals to eliminate the overlap, because nobody, I'm sure, wants to give up potential customers, and they end up shooting each other, and nobody gets it. So is there any kind of, well, let me ask this question. Does the county have to partner on those grant applications? They can do them if they can do them independently, we have no leverage.
Supervisor
Okay,
Robinson?
thank you.
You're correct, and we have a call set up at 2 o'clock today with those providers to try to reduce that. We've been successful in the first application 2 years ago where we had AirNet, Northwood Communications, or is it Northwood Communications?
Northwoods Connect? Yeah.
Yeah, and Bug Tussle, and they sat down and they basically, they agreed on not to overlap, and it was very good. We're sensing Frontier, for instance, wants to serve their DSL line area. They're looking at a separate overlay of fiber to their DSL lines in addition to their DSL lines. So they're into their territory. They're reluctant to modify. Charter has expressed they met with us and said, where are some underserved areas? We pointed those out. Fortunately or unfortunately, other people also saw an opportunity in those areas, so we've got some overlap. The motion included trying to work with them to reduce that duplication. I think we're going to ultimately have to make an arbitrary decision of saying, this is in the best interest of the county based upon cost, number of people served, speeds, and cost to the consumers, and then move forward with one in those service areas. And hopefully they'll break down. We'll have to struggle with how we would word our letters of support based upon their willingness or reluctance to do that. We may not be able to support proposals that significantly overlap with other ones. But again, they have the right to do that. The last round, Frontier did not request any participation from the county in terms of partnership, and they submitted 3 very significant applications totaling about $21 million without our involvement. But again, our goal is to advance broadband to the residents of the county, irrespective of internet service provider. And I think, again, going forward, we need a better process, and I think we've learned that. And now the question is, what will that process look like? Jerry, or Sandy, or Kurt, or Nor?
Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday I had an email from Frontier. They're looking for.
Let's get him a microphone if we could, please.
Thank you. Yesterday I had an email from Frontier, from Scott Bohr, yes. And he's looking for some participation from our township. And is there a suggestion what we should do on this? He said it's got to be in by the 17th of March, so there's sort of a short time frame for this. So I mean, I don't want to jump the gun, but I don't want to overdo this either.
Supervisor Robinson?
So we have encouraged all of the internet service providers to reach out to develop partnerships. Serenity, for instance, reached out to the town of Reed, and they received a $70,000 commitment through ARPA for that. The others have been slow to do that. I know that Bug Tussle has been at the Towns Association meetings, both Eastern and Western, talking about the routes and try to modify their plans within available resources. And we sent out yesterday, under Chair Gibbs' signature, a letter to the town saying that we will be potentially asking for letters of support to those that are served by the grants and or contributions. It's up to you as to how you wish to do it. I think we would encourage you to look at who the providers are in those areas. There are a significant number of areas where we don't overlap, but the question is, does the overlap wind up throwing out the entire application? And that's one of our concerns.
Jerry?
Just want to add, I think it's a good idea to do, the town to submit. It'll be stronger for any of the applications that go against the PSC. Keep in mind that you have that's your leverage. And so if I was you, I would make sure that your town hall, where your vote is covered. If it's not on their map, say, well, we're interested in giving you money, but you had to cover this. And then you may want to, you probably are pretty aware of what areas of your township are more problematic than others. If I was you, I would use it as an opportunity to focus on those and say, I'll give you this money, but here's the places we need you to go.
Yeah, they had 300 households that they were going to serve, I guess. And there were 2 different areas there, but they both need them.
Yeah, most likely, in my experience, and John and Nora and I looking at these maps recently, they're going where they are. It's also very beneficial to them. Like they're trying to connect up pieces of their network, or they're trying to connect up where the roads have the most people on it. But that might not necessarily be where you need to focus.
Supervisor Dickinson?
So I was just going to say thank you to John and the task force, because you are doing just an incredible amount of work for our county to get this done. When you bring these updates at infrastructure or towns association or county board, I'm just kind of blown away by the amount of communication that must be happening with these providers. I'm a little upset with the providers because for years they, exactly, they wanted no part of providing service to the average citizen in our rural areas. And now that there's money to be had, here they come knocking, and as we work with them and knock on the door, they come some more, but still their stubbornness with these overlaps and our area, I understand business, don't get me wrong, but I think the last couple of years should really be a wake-up call to these folks that we have an infrastructure that needs to be in place, not only in our county, but in the country, to assist people with just living. So I thank you for that. I endorse what you're stating here with the 235, if that has to be an approximate value or whatever. And I also support the idea of the overlap. If we need to put in something, if it's overlap, we're not going down that path, then we don't. So thank you.
I would second those comments. It is a tremendous amount of work that's being done by the chair of the task force and all the other staff that's working on it as well. So appreciate all the work that's being done on that. And we look forward to future updates. Supervisor Seiler.
Yes, thank you. I'll just use this as an opportunity to really encourage those who, Supervisor Christensen in particular, on the speed test that was sent out as a message from the county. We're working with, as you know, Geo Partners in the Central Wisconsin Planning Commission to get the speed test done. It's really amazing and to show what you can get on that. And so if you haven't already done that at your town hall or at your home, or anybody, your town board officials, it's really so important to show what those upload, download, and all that kind of good stuff is, and that lights up on the map. So anyone in the room that hasn't already done that or shared it with everybody in your family and your network, get that message out, because it's the best way for us to prove where the unserved or underserved areas are, because we know those FCC maps they're useless. So again, just another plug to do that. It's simple, but share the word. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson.
I guess I wanted to provide an update, but I also have an ask. If we could advance the funding proposal to HR Finance for their consideration for the 235 and potential loan availability.
Is that a motion? Would you like to make a motion?
Yes.
We have a motion from Robinson and a second from Johnson. Any further discussion?
Could you repeat that motion for the record, please?
The motion would be is that the Infrastructure Committee supports and refers to the HR Finance Property Committee the funding proposal advanced by the Broadband Task Force of $235 per unit as a forgivable loan and a loan availability above that, subject to county board approval.
Supervisor Robinson?
And implicit in that discussion is that we avoid duplication and overlap of services relative to grant partners.
Supervisor Dickinson? Oh. Any further questions, comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed, say nay. All right, we will be moving on. If it's okay with the committee, I'd like to move around our agenda a little bit just to get some updates out of the way. So if we're okay, I'd like to do items 6B and C, the update from the Highway Commissioner and CCIT Director. Anybody opposed to that? If not, we'll move on to the update from the Highway Commissioner. If you could also talk a little bit about 28th Avenue, where we're at in that process.
Sure, thank you. Regarding the 28th Avenue, Becker Hoppy currently are working on those plans. We expect to see the first draft of those plans here in the next week or so. At that point, we'll sit down with the city of Wausau to get our comments, and hopefully by the April meeting, we can have the preliminary plans back from Becker Hoppy for further review. But again, we're anticipating those plans maybe next week, if not the following week, early part, and we'll sit together with the city of Wausau to determine our needs at that point. There's been a lot of work done on the Wisconsin County Highway Administration search at this point. Right now, for your information, the WCHA, we have 2 contract employees. We have an executive director, and we have a person who's in charge of our training and committee conferences. Gary's contract, who's in charge of the committees, the conferences, and the training, his contract runs through July of 2024. Our current executive director, Dan Federley's contract runs out 2023. We've always done it this way with the County Highway Association. We're becoming a big enough organization. We are looking at bringing on a administrative association administrator to watch and go through and handle some of the parts that Dan and Gary both do. It'll be a step process. In the beginning, they'll just take care of minutes, setting up meetings, getting us a better website, keeping our website updated, getting us on 365, getting us some email addresses. And so we're looking at we looked at 4 firms. We interviewed 4 firms. We have it narrowed down to 2 firms. We'll be interviewing the last 2 firms on Monday to bring on that work. Eventually, what we like to do is eliminate Gary, the person that's in charge of the conferences and trainings contract totally, and have the service provided by whoever we pick. And the one firm, a couple of the firms that we're looking at they're both from Madison area. One of the firms does a lot of stuff with counties right now, so they're kind of the leading candidate at this point. Again, we can sit down with them, but we'll be able to generate more revenue with bringing on this associate manager and cut our costs by cutting one or 2 of those contracts. We will still have a face of the WCHA. We'll still have an executive director after Dan retires in 2023. What we're looking at doing is using this administrative services as a pass-through. Most people won't even know that that person works for whoever we select. They're still going to be the face of our association. But instead of us having an employee, whatever firm we select, they would provide all the benefits, and we wouldn't have to worry about any of those details as having an employee, which would be a task in its own, having an employee with an employee handbook and all the benefits. So we'll just run it through that association. Moving on to the BIL, I am submitting 3 projects for the April 1st deadline. I have 2 of those applications done. Then there's another deadline set for June 1st. That one I'll probably be submitting at least 7 bridges and possibly up to 4 road projects. And for that project, the thing that's happening right now that a lot of people haven't heard about is the federal government still the appropriations bill still has not been approved. If that isn't approved by next week, the 2022 projects aren't going to happen. So if March 11th is kind of the deadline, if the federal government don't get that appropriations bill passed by then, nothing's going to happen in 2022. And at this point, I don't have high hopes that the federal government's going to pass anything in a week. 20th Avenue duties. And as far as our road crews, we're just getting ready for we're getting ready for the spring weather, and we're starting to thaw pipes. And on a sad note, one of our former employees that just retired last week due to cancer, Keith Borkert, unfortunately, he lost his battle with cancer yesterday afternoon. So we have a heavy hearts at the Highway Department for Keith Borkert. Completes my report.
Thank you for that report. Do we have any questions, comments from the committee? Supervisor Christensen.
Do you have any idea when weight limits are going on after this rain this weekend?
You have any idea what the weather's gonna be the next 2 weeks? This time, we don't have any idea when the weight limits are going on. Typically, it's right around March 15th, give or take a day, if it's a normal year. But if the weather warms up to upper 40s and we get rain, they can go on. If it goes back in the freezer, it could stay off. But I always use that 15th, give or take a few days, if it's a normal season.
Further comments, questions on that report? Seeing none, we'll move on to the CCIT Director report. Take it away, Jerry.
Thank you. The update is, there's a project update in your packet. I just would highlight two things. We finished the multi-factor authentication project. We're doing a little cleanup. We had a few problems with some of the county board members' iPads that we weren't able to actually understand what happened, but about 5 or 6 of them we had working for about a week or two and then stopped working. So if any of you have had that problem, let us know. It's a relatively easy fix. But otherwise, Jeff is one of them. Otherwise, the MFA project is wrapped up, and we're in good shape because of that. There's a lot of attention from the federal government, the arms of the federal government that deal with cybersecurity right now, on concerns about cyber attacks because of the Russian-Ukraine situation. There's nothing specific, but they are continuing to attack, do cyber infrastructure attacks on city and county governments as well. County governments have been more of a target the last few years. A few years back, it was all state governments, and now lately it's been more county governments more recently. On the ERP project, I want to give you an update on that. That's the Enterprise Resource Planning Project. That is taking a lot of resources from finance and human resource teams. But it's going well. Lance and I met with the team yesterday. There's a couple of things that we have to work on. They're mostly process-oriented. We haven't run into any problems where the system isn't going to do what we need it to do. Jim has reached out to me to look at what the highway department needs for software. He's hiding right now because I'm a little cranky at him. We haven't signed a contract with Cartograph, but Jim wants us to look at another solution. So we're going to be looking at that very quickly because we don't have a lot of time. Any questions on those projects? So the ERP project, again, is 3 pieces of software. It's Workday, which is the main core ERP system that the finance department will use. That's also where budgeting happens. So all of your general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and payroll, and then all of the HR modules, of which we've had really done in the past. So Molly's going to be able to implement a lot of HR-related automation that we haven't had in the past. And then we are putting in a cashiering system called Teller, which we'll use in the departments here that take cash at the counter. So treasury, clerks, register deeds, parks department, that kind of stuff. And then we have to have a solution for highway job costing, which we're still working on. Any questions on?
Any questions on that report?
Report. Thank you, Mr.
Seeing none, thank you for that. And we'll move back to item 4D. I would take a motion if somebody wants to read that out. Supervisor Dickinson.
I make a motion to go into closed session, roll call vote pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, section 1, subsection E, for the purpose of deliberating or negotiation, the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, to wit, discussion regarding possible land purchase for future joint county facilities.
We have a motion from Dickinson and a second from Supervisor Johnson. I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Pfeffer,
Yes.
Seiler. Dickinson. Johnson. Gums. Robinson. Christensen.
All right, motion passes, and we'll, looks like we've got the public. Yeah.